The colonel leaned in close enough that I could smell his coffee, and he whispered 4 words against my ear. "Listen and don't speak." I did not move. I kept my hands flat on the folder in front of me. I kept my eyes on the map at the head of the room. I said nothing, because saying nothing was a skill I had spent 21 years learning, and because the thing about a whisper like that is that the man who gives it has already decided who you are. Explaining does not change his mind, it only gives him something to interrupt. His name was Tate, Colonel Warren Tate. I did not know him yet. I would learn that he was the chief of staff of the headquarters, that he had run this council for 2 years, and that he had walked into the room that morning, seen a small woman in a service uniform sitting near the front with a folder, and filed me under something he did not need to think about again. A note-taker, a protocol officer, somebody's aide who had wandered up too far. He straightened, he turned back to the table. He kept talking as if the chair I was in were empty. "As I was saying," he said, "the northern route is the one we brief up. The rest is noise." 12 officers at the table. Nobody looked at me. That is the part people never believe. When a man does that to you in a room, the room does not rush to your defense. The room studies its notes. The room waits for the awkwardness to pass. Everyone at that table had felt the whisperland, and everyone at that table decided in the same half-second that it was easier to pretend they had not. I had felt that before. I had felt it my whole career. I let it sit. I had time. I was not going anywhere. What Colonel Tate did not know, what none of them knew yet, was that, in about 90 seconds, the doors at the back of that room were going to open, and the man who came through them was going to make the whisper the most expensive 4 words Warren Tate had ever spoken. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the start of that morning, because the whisper is not really where the story begins. The story begins with a habit I had carried for 21 years, and the morning it finally turned around and looked at me. I have made a career out of being the quietest person in the room. That is not a complaint. It is a description of the trade. I am a military intelligence officer. I have been one since 2005, when I raised my right hand at 22 years old and swore the oath and went off to learn a job that mostly consists of knowing things you cannot say. In my line, the person doing the talking is almost never the person who knows the most. The person who knows the most is usually off to the side, quiet, watching, because the knowing came at a price, and the price was paid in silence. I learned that early. I learned it so well, it became who I was. I got to the headquarters that morning at 06:45, which was early because I am always early. I walk the ground, even in a building, especially in a building. Before a council, before a brief, before anything that matters, I like to see the room while it is still empty, to know where the doors are and where the light falls and where I will sit. A map is a promise. The room is the truth. I have believed that since my first tour. The council was in a secure conference room 2 floors down, the kind of room with no windows and a lot of screens and a long table that has hosted more bad news than any table should have to hold. I signed in. I found the room. It was mostly empty when I got there. Not entirely empty. There was a sergeant major already inside, squaring away the seats, and she looked up when I came in, and something in her face changed, just slightly, the way a professional's face changes when the right person walks in, a beat before anyone expects them. "Colonel Holt," she said. "Sergeant Major." Her name was Lena Fowler. She had 25 years in, and the calm of a woman who had run rooms full of generals and was not impressed by any of them. She had flown in ahead of the change to help the new director find her feet, because that is what the good ones do. She did not salute in a secure room. She just gave me the small nod that senior enlisted give an officer they have decided to take seriously. "Saved you a seat," she said. "Front of the room, where it belongs." "I'll take the one near the front," I said. "Not the head. Not yet. I haven't taken the room." She looked at me for a second. "Yes, ma'am," she said, and I could tell she filed something away, the way she filed everything away. I sat near the front, not at the head. That was a choice. The change of command was in 2 days. The directorate was not mine yet, not officially, and I did not believe in sitting in a chair I had not earned the right to sit in. So I took a seat one down from the head of the table, and I put my folder in front of me, and I waited for the council to fill, and I watched the room the way I have watched every room for 21 years. Quiet. Off to the side, present, but easy to miss, easy to miss. That was the whole thing. I had spent so long being easy to miss that I had stopped noticing I was doing it. I want to explain the habit, because it is not laziness, and it is not fear. It is training. In my trade, being noticed is a liability. The analyst who wants the room to look at her is the analyst who stops watching the room. You learn to sit still. You learn to take the seat with the best sightline and the worst spotlight. You learn to let the loud people be loud, because the loud people are easy to read, and reading people is the job. For 21 years, I had been the person in the corner who saw everything and said little, and it had made me very good at my work, and it had made me nearly invisible. And I had told myself those two things were the same thing. They are not. I was about to find out how not. Sergeant Major Fowler watched me choose the lower seat, and she did not argue, but I saw her file it. She had been around long enough to know the difference between humility and a habit, and she suspected correctly that mine had crossed over from the first into the second a long time ago. She did not say so. Senior enlisted soldiers do not tell a new colonel her business on the first morning. They wait. They let you show them who you are, and then they decide how much of themselves to give you. She was deciding about me that morning. Most of the room would decide about me in the next hour, without meaning to, and they would decide wrong, and then they would have to decide again. I checked the screens, I checked the doors, I noted the 2 exits and the classified line taped on the floor and the coffee urn that was nearly empty and would be a problem in 20 minutes. Old habits. You walk the ground even when the ground is a windowless room 2 floors underground, especially then. I came to the quiet, honestly. I grew up in a small town where the loud people got the attention and rarely deserved it. And I learned young to watch, instead of talk, to be the one who noticed things, because noticing was the only power available to a small girl in a loud place. I carried that into the Army, and the Army rewarded it, in my branch anyway. Intelligence is a trade built for the watchers. Nobody ever told me to be louder. Every evaluation I ever got praised my judgment and my composure, and my ability to see what others missed, and not one of them ever noted the cost of it, because the cost of it did not show up on an evaluation. It showed up in rooms. It showed up as the slow, accumulated weight of being the most capable person present and the least visible, over and over for 2 decades. Until being overlooked stopped feeling like an insult and started feeling like home. That is the danger nobody warns you about. Not that the world will underestimate you. You can survive being underestimated. The danger is that you will get so good at it, so comfortable inside it, that you will start doing the work of your own erasure yourself before anyone else even lifts a finger. You will take the lower seat. You will hold the uncomfortable truth for later. You will let the loud man run the room around you and call it grace. By the time Warren Tate leaned over and told me to listen and not speak, I had been telling myself the same thing, in the same words, for 21 years. He was not introducing an idea. He was just saying my own habit out loud, in a stranger's voice. And something about hearing it out loud, that particular morning, at the head of that particular table, finally made me hear how small it was. So when I say I walked the ground that morning, understand that the most important ground I walked was the ground inside my own head, though I did not know it yet. I checked the doors and the screens and the coffee, and a habit 21 years deep sat quietly in the lower chair, waiting, the way it always did, for a room that would never quite get around to seeing it. The officers filed in, majors and lieutenant colonels, and a couple of full colonels, the working level of a joint headquarters, the people who actually move the machine while the flag officers make the decisions. They filled the seats. They had their coffee and their tablets and their small, careful conversations. A few of them glanced at me. None of them placed me. A colonel they did not recognize, sitting near the front, in service uniform, quiet. It did not compute, so they let it go. People do that. They let the thing they cannot place slide off them. There was a young major who sat down across from me, younger than the rest, 30 maybe, sharp uniform, eager eyes, the kind of officer who still believes the meeting is where the work happens. I clocked him, and I dismissed him in the same motion, the way you do, the way I had done 1,000 times. Green, I thought, eager, trying too hard. I was wrong about that, and I would find out how wrong in about 20 minutes, and it would land harder than anything else that happened in that room. But I did not know it yet. I filed him under nothing, and I looked back at the map. His name was Ashby, Major Neil Ashby. Remember him? I did not that morning, not really. That was my mistake, and it is the one I am least proud of. I have gone back over that glance many times since. There was nothing cruel in it. That is what makes it worth telling. I did not sneer at him. I did not whisper anything in his ear. I simply looked at a young officer and sorted him, in half a second, into a box marked not important yet, and moved on. It felt like judgment. It felt like the earned instinct of a person who has watched 1,000 officers and can read them fast. But it was not judgment. It was the same reflex Warren Tate was about to use on me, running quieter and in a nicer suit. I want to be honest about that from the start, so that when it comes back around, you understand I saw it clearly, eventually, and did not let myself off the hook. He had a good uniform and a fresh haircut, and a stack of Rita heads he had clearly actually read, tabbed, and marked. And I registered all of that and filed it under, trying too hard, when a fairer reading would have been prepared. There is a thin line between those two, and which side you land on depends almost entirely on what you have already decided about the person. I had already decided. I did not know I had decided. That is how it works. The judgment arrives dressed as an observation. Colonel Warren Tate came in last, the way senior staff do, timing his entrance so the room was already full and waiting. He was tall, silver at the temples, immaculate. He had the easy authority of a man who had run this room for 2 years and had stopped noticing that he ran it. He set his coffee down at a chair near the head of the table, one up from me, and he swept the room with a glance, doing his count, checking his timeline. His glance passed over me. I watched him do the math. Small woman, service uniform, folder, near the front but not at the head. And I watched him get it wrong, the way I had watched 100 men get it wrong, and I felt the old thing settle in my chest, the flat, quiet patience of a person who has learned that being underestimated is a weather system, not a verdict. He sat, he started the council. He was good at it, I will give him that. He ran a tight table, he moved through the agenda with the confidence of a man who knew the material and knew the room. The council itself was routine, a planning session on a set of routes and the intelligence coverage over them. Which corridors we watched, which we did not, where the picture was thin. The kind of session that decides, quietly and without drama, what the command will know and not know when something goes wrong at 3 a.m. It is dull work, and it is the most important work there is. And the people who do it well are the people who ask the uncomfortable question in the dull room, the question about the gap, the thing everyone would rather brief around. Tate did not ask the uncomfortable question. He briefed around it. He walked the council toward the tidy answer, the northern route, the recommendation that would look clean going up the chain. I watched him do it, and I saw the gap he was steering past, the thin coverage on the flank that no one wanted to name because naming it meant more work and a harder brief. I saw it because seeing it is my whole life. And the old habit told me to hold it, to wait, to bring it up privately later so as not to embarrass anyone. Listen and don't speak. I was already obeying the order before he gave it. And about 10 minutes in, when I shifted in my seat to reach for a document, he leaned over, close, and he whispered it. Listen and don't speak. The adults are working. Here is what you have to understand about that whisper, because it is the center of everything. It did not make me angry. I want to be honest about that. 21 years earlier, it would have. 21 years earlier, I would have flushed and stammered and either shrunk into my chair or said something sharp I would regret. But I was 43 years old, and I had been whispered at by better men than Warren Tate, and the anger had long since burned down to something colder and more useful. What it did was make me tired. A specific, old kind of tired. Because I had been here before. Not this room, this moment, this exact moment in 100 different rooms, across a whole career. The moment when a man decides you are furniture and arranges the room around that decision, and you have 2 choices, and both of them are bad. The first choice is to make yourself small, to let it go, to listen and not speak, the way he told me to, because making a scene is unprofessional and difficult, and it makes everyone uncomfortable, and it will follow you around longer than it follows him. I had made that choice more times than I could count. I had made it so many times that it was not even a choice anymore. It was a reflex. Smooth it over, Keep the peace. Let the work speak later. The work always speaks later. The second choice is to strike, to pull my folder open and produce my rank and my orders and put Colonel Tate in his place in front of the whole council. I could have done it. It would have been satisfying. And it would have made me exactly the kind of officer who settles a score in a staff meeting, the kind of officer who needs the room to know she was wronged, and I did not want to be that either. So I sat with the tiredness. I let it be what it was, and underneath it, for the first time in a long time, I felt something new turning over, because I was about to take command of this directorate. In 2 days, I would be the director, and I realized, sitting there with a man's coffee breath still in my ear, that the habit that had carried me this far, the habit of being quiet, of letting the work speak, of making myself easy to miss, was not going to be a strength anymore. It had been a strength for a captain and a major. For a director, it was going to be a liability. A director who lets herself be treated like furniture teaches 400 people that the directorate can be run around. I did not have that thought fully formed, not yet. But it was there, turning, when the doors at the back of the room opened. Let me tell you about the wound, because you cannot understand why I had gotten so good at being quiet unless you understand what silence had once cost me. It was 2012. Afghanistan. I was a captain, and I ran a fusion cell, which is a fancy way of saying I ran a small team of very tired people who sat in a plywood room and pulled threads. We took everything: signals, imagery, the reports that came in from the field, the small, strange details that did not fit. And we wove them into a picture, and the picture told the people with the rifles and the aircraft where to look. There was a night that winter. I am not going to give you the details because most of them are still classified, and the rest of them are not mine to give. But I will give you the shape of it. My cell pulled a thread that everyone else had let go of. A small thing, a pattern in the noise, and I sat in that plywood room for 19 hours, and I did not sleep, and I built the picture, and I was right. And because I was right, a convoy did not drive into what was waiting for it, and 2 contractors who had been taken alive were found and brought home before the week that would have ended them. I remember the room, plywood walls, a space heater that did not work and a fan that did, the smell of burnt coffee and dust, 6 of us, and screens on every wall, and the low, endless chatter of the feeds. I remember the moment the thread pulled taut, the small pattern in the noise that everyone senior to me had glanced at and set aside. I did not set it aside. I do not know why. You develop a feel over years for the thing that does not fit, and this did not fit, and I put my thumb on it and I pressed. I remember not sleeping, 19 hours. I remember a young sergeant on my team, a kid from a town smaller than mine, bringing me coffee I did not drink and saying, "You've got something, ma'am, haven't you?" And me saying, "Maybe. Keep pulling." I remember the picture coming together the way a photograph comes up in a tray, slow, and then all at once. I remember making the call. I remember the weight of it, because if I was wrong, I was going to send people to the wrong place, and the right place would go unwatched. And in my trade, being wrong is not an embarrassment. It is a funeral. I was not wrong. The convoy held. The 2 men came home. I sat in that plywood room afterward, and I shook a little, the way you do when the thing is over and your body finally lets you feel what you would not let yourself feel while it mattered. I did not fire a shot. I never do. My whole war was fought in a plywood room with a headset and a wall of screens. But I was right when it counted, and being right is the only thing my trade has to offer, and that night I was as right as I have ever been. Here's the part that matters. The next morning there was a briefing, a big one. And a senior officer, a man 2 ranks above me, stood up in front of the room and walked through what had happened, and he told the story of the thread and the picture and the save, and he told it well, and he did not say my name. Not once. He said we, he said the staff, he said our analysts. And I stood at the back of that room, 29 years old, and I listened to a man take the shape of my 19 hours and wear it like his own coat, and I said nothing. Because that is what you do. You are a captain. He is a colonel. The work got done. The men came home. What does it matter whose name is on it? That is what I told myself. I told myself the work was enough. I told myself that the people who needed to know knew. And some of them did. There were people in that theater who knew exactly whose cell had pulled that thread. And a few of them made sure I got a medal for it. Quietly, later. But I learned something in that room, and I learned it wrong. I learned that silence keeps the peace. What I did not learn, what took me another 14 years to learn, was that silence also teaches the room you are not there. Every time I chose to be quiet so that a man could be comfortable, I was not just keeping the peace. I was training the world to look through me. I was building, one silence at a time, the exact conditions that put Warren Tate's coffee breath in my ear. I told myself the work was enough. For a long time, I believed it. I was still believing it, a little, on the morning the doors opened. The doors at the back of the secure conference room opened, and a 4-star general walked in. You feel a 4-star before you see him. The room feels it. There's a change in the air pressure, a straightening, a stilling. 12 officers at that table came upright in their chairs without being told. Even Colonel Tate stopped talking, mid-sentence, and turned toward the back of the room with the automatic deference of a man who has spent 30 years learning which way to turn. General Theodore Kraft was the combatant commander. 4 stars, 60 years old, lean, gray, with the flat, unhurried eyes of a man who had made more hard decisions before breakfast than most people make in a career. He was not supposed to be at this council. This was a working session, staff level, below his line. His presence in that room was itself a message, and every officer at the table was trying to read it. I knew General Kraft a little. Not well. Our paths had crossed twice, years apart, in the way that paths cross in this business, over a problem that could not be discussed in a hallway and was never discussed again. He was not a warm man. He did not do warmth. What he did was remember. He remembered who had been right in the room when being right was hard, and who had been loud, and he kept the 2 lists separate in his head for decades. I did not know, until that morning, that I was on the first list. You rarely know which list you are on. You just do the work and hope someone is keeping count. He stood at the back for a moment and scanned the room. His eyes moved across the table, across the colonels and the lieutenant colonels and the majors, across Warren Tate, standing now at a respectful half-attention by the head of the table. I watched the council try to read him. 12 officers, all of them fluent in the language of a 4-star's body, all of them running the same silent calculation. Why is he here? What does it mean? Who is this for? They were looking at the general and at Tate, because Tate ran the room, and the room's attention followed Tate the way a compass follows north. Not one of them was looking at me, which meant not one of them saw what I saw, which was the exact moment the general's eyes stopped moving. And then his eyes found me, 1 seat down from the head, in my service uniform, with my folder, and he came straight to me. He walked the length of that room, past the whole council, past Tate, and he stopped in front of my chair, and he said, in a voice that carried because he did not bother to lower it, "Colonel Holt, they started without you." A pause. "My apologies. That's on my headquarters, not on you." The room went very still. Colonel Tate was still turned toward the general, and I watched the words reach him. I watched him hear Colonel Holt. I watched him try to fit it to the small woman in the service uniform he had whispered at 10 minutes earlier, the note-taker, the aide, the furniture. I watched his mind refuse the fit, and then begin to accept it, and then accept it completely. He could not believe his ears. I did not need him to. The room already had. I want to slow down here, because the 10 seconds after General Kraft said my name were the most important 10 seconds in the room, and almost nothing happened in them, and that was the point. The old pull was still there. Even then, even with a 4-star general standing in front of my chair and the whole council frozen and Warren Tate's face coming apart 1 degree at a time. The old pull said, "Smooth it over. Make it easy. Stand up, shake the general's hand, wave off the apology, get the meeting back on track. Let Tate save face. Do not make anyone uncomfortable." The old pull was strong. It had been running my life for 21 years, and it did not surrender its territory easily. And there was a second pull now, the sharp one, the one that wanted to turn to Tate and say something that would take him apart in front of the people he ran this room for. That one was strong too. 90 seconds of coffee breath and the adults are working had built a pressure, and here was the valve, and part of me wanted to open it wide. I did neither. I stood up, slowly. I did not rush it. I looked at General Kraft and I said, "No apology needed, sir. I was early. I like to watch a room before I run it." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, the memory of one. "That's so," he said. "Yes, sir." I did not look at Tate. "Not yet. I want you to understand that this was deliberate. The smaller version of me would have needed to look at him, would have needed to see his face, to collect the win, to make sure he knew that I knew. I did not need it anymore. I had spent 21 years learning that the loudest thing I owned was my silence. And this was the moment to spend it well, and spending it well meant not turning it into a weapon. I was not going to humiliate him. I was only going to stop erasing myself to keep him comfortable. Those are different things. It took me most of my career to learn how different. Erasing yourself feels like grace. That is the trap of it. You tell yourself you're being generous, letting the other person keep their footing, not making a scene, taking the high road. And sometimes that is true. But sometimes it is just fear wearing Grace's coat, and the only way to tell them apart is to ask what you are protecting. If you are protecting the room, that is grace. If you are protecting yourself from the discomfort of being seen, that is fear. And I had spent a great many years calling my fear by Grace's name. Standing in front of General Kraft with the whole council frozen, I made a small private decision, and it was not about Tate at all. It was about me. I decided that I was done disappearing to make rooms comfortable. Not loud. I was never going to be loud, but present, visible, willing to occupy the space that was actually mine. It sounds like a small thing. It was the hardest thing I did that morning, harder than anything the generals or the chair did for me, because it was the only part that required me to change, and everyone knows that changing yourself is the one reveal no ceremony can do for you. General Kraft turned to the table. "For those who haven't met her," he said, "this is Colonel Marin Holt. She takes the directorate on Thursday. I came down here this morning to tell this council to give her everything she asked for, because in about 72 hours, she is going to be the person in this building I trust most with the hardest problems we have." He let that sit. "I see you started without her. I'd fix that." Then he did something I did not expect. He looked at Sergeant Major Fowler, who had been standing quietly against the wall the whole time, watching everything, and he gave her the smallest nod. And Sergeant Major Fowler walked to the head of the table, to the chair at the very front, the director's chair, the one I had refused to sit in when I came in early because I had not earned it yet. She put her hand on the back of it, and she drew it back, and she turned to me and waited. The whole room understood at once. I looked at the chair. Colonel Edith Lang, the outgoing director, was not in the room that morning. The seat had sat empty at the head of the table the entire council, and Warren Tate had run the meeting from the chair beside it, from my chair, from one seat down, close enough to lean over and whisper in my ear. The chair at the head had been waiting the entire time. It had been mine the entire time. I had just refused to take it a day early. General Kraft said quietly, "Take the room, Colonel. It's yours." I walked to the head of the table. I passed Warren Tate. I did not look at him, but I heard him because he was close, and what I heard was a man trying to start a sentence and not finding the front of it. Colonel Holt, I didn't realize." "I know," I said, quietly, just to him, not unkindly. "Sit down, Colonel. We have a council to finish." And I took the chair. Sergeant Major Fowler stepped back to the wall. General Kraft found a seat along the side, because even a 4-star does not take the head of a table that belongs to someone else, and I understood that this too was a message, and that the general was a better teacher than he let on. I sat at the head of the table, and I looked at the council, and the council looked at me, and everything was different now. 10 minutes earlier, I had been furniture. Now I was the person the combatant commander had come downstairs to vouch for. The same small woman in the same service uniform. Nothing about me had changed, only what the room knew. That is the thing about the truth. It does not change you, it changes what the room can see. You are always who you are. The reveal is not about you at all. It is about them, and the moment their picture snaps into line with the fact. I did not gloat. There was nothing to gloat about. I had not won anything I did not already have. The directorate had been mine since the orders were cut weeks earlier. All that happened in that room was that a group of officers found out a little early and one of them found out the hard way. "Let's pick it up," I said. Colonel Tate was walking us through the northern route. "Colonel, please continue." I gave it back to him. "I want you to sit with that because it surprised the room more than anything else that morning." I gave the brief back to the man who had whispered in my ear. Not as a trap, not to watch him squirm, because the work still needed doing, and he knew the material, and a director who cannot let a man who wronged her do his job is a director who has made the meeting about herself. I was not going to make the meeting about myself. I had spent too long making myself invisible to now make myself the center of the room out of spite. Tate continued. His voice was not steady at first. It found its feet. He was, underneath the arrogance, a competent officer, and competence is a kind of anchor, and he held on to it. He walked us through the northern route. And that is when the second thing happened, the thing I am least proud of. The thing that landed harder than the whisper is, as Tate talked, a document slid across the table and stopped in front of me. I looked down at it. It was the council read ahead, open to a specific page, page 4, and in the margin, in small, neat handwriting, someone had flagged a problem with the northern route, a collections gap, a blind spot in the coverage that everyone briefing the northern route was talking around without naming. It was exactly the kind of thing my old fusion cell would have caught, a thread in the noise, and someone at this table had already caught it and had quietly put it in front of me, the new director, so that I would have it in my hand the moment I needed it. I looked up to see who had slid it across. It was the young major, Ashby, the one I had clocked and dismissed the moment he sat down. Green, I had thought. Eager, trying too hard. And here he was, 30 years old, having done the exact work I built my career on, having found the gap that 12 more senior officers were talking around, and having done the one thing that separates a good intelligence officer from a loud one. He had put the truth in front of the person who needed it and let the truth do the talking. "Your read on the northern route, ma'am," he said, low, just to me. "Page 4, I flagged it for you. I didn't want to step on the colonel in front of the room." I looked at that young major, and I felt the ground shift under me because I understood what I was looking at. I was looking at myself, at 29, in a plywood room, right about the thing everyone else had let go of, and quiet about it, and careful not to embarrass anyone, and easy to overlook. And I had overlooked him. I had done to Neil Ashby, in the space of one glance, exactly what Warren Tate had done to me. I had looked at a person and decided I already knew what they were worth. The only difference between me and Tate that morning was that Tate had said it out loud, and I had kept it in my head. And I am not sure that difference is as flattering to me as I would like it to be. I had spent the whole council quietly furious at a man for underestimating me. And I had underestimated the one person at that table who was actually doing my job better than anyone else in the room. That landed harder than anything Tate did. It is still landing. Here is why it landed so hard. For 21 years, I had carried the wound of being looked through, and I had built an entire identity around being the one who sees, the quiet one, the one who watches, the one who's never fooled by the loud man at the head of the table. That was my picture of myself, and it was a flattering picture, and Neil Ashby's piece of paper took it apart as neatly as Kraft's arrival had taken apart Tate's picture of me. Because if I am the one who sees, how did I not see him? He sat down across from me and did the work and read the room and found the gap. And I looked at him for half a second and decided he was noise. The truth is that being underestimated does not make you immune to underestimating others. If anything, it makes you worse at it. Because you are so busy watching for the contempt aimed at you that you never notice the contempt leaking out of you toward someone else. The wound does not automatically make you kind. It has to be turned into kindness on purpose, and I had not done that work. I had just nursed the wound and congratulated myself for having it. Ashby handed me that across a table without knowing he was handing me anything. He thought he was flagging a collections gap. He was also flagging a gap in me. I did not make a show of it. That is not how you fix a thing like that. I read page 4. I looked at the gap Ashby had flagged, and it was real, and it mattered. And it changed the recommendation the council was about to send up. When Tate finished, I did not overrule him from the head of the table, like a person proving a point. I said, "There's a collections gap on the northern route that we're all talking around. Page 4 of the read ahead. It's flagged. Before this goes up, I want it named and I want a plan to close it." Tate frowned at his own copy. "I don't see." "Major Ashby flagged it," I said. "Major, walk us through what you found." I watched the young officer's head come up. I watched him realize he had just been called on, by name, by the new director, in front of a 4-star general and 12 officers who outranked him. And I watched him do the thing that told me everything I needed to know about him. He did not preen, and he did not freeze. He opened his read ahead to page 4, and he walked us through the gap, clearly and without drama, the way a person does when the work matters more than the credit. When he finished, the room was quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Not the quiet of a room pretending not to see something. The quiet of a room that had just watched a problem get named that should have been named an hour ago. "Good work, Major," I said. "That's the kind of thing this directorate is going to say out loud from now on. Rank waits its turn in this room. We say what we see." I did not look at Tate when I said it. I did not have to. He heard it. Everyone heard it. It was not aimed at him, and it was aimed at him, and it was aimed at me too. At the 29-year-old who had stood at the back of a briefing and let a man wear her 19 hours like a coat and had called it keeping the peace. We say what we see. I had needed to hear it as much as any of them. General Kraft left before the council ended. He caught my eye on the way out and gave me a short nod, and I understood that I had passed something, though he would never say so, because generals do not tell colonels they have passed a test. They just adjust how much they hand you next time. But he stopped by the door, and he did a small thing I have thought about often since. There was a chair pushed out of line near the wall, and he set it straight as he passed, a 4-star general squaring a folding chair on his way out of a room, and I understood that he had done it on purpose, and that it was a lesson, and that the lesson was this. The people who are too important to straighten a chair are exactly the people you cannot trust with a room. Warren Tate had been one of them at 0700. General Kraft, 30 years and a great deal more rank further along, was not. The distance between those two men was the whole distance I wanted my directorate to travel. The council finished its business. The officers filed out. Some of them stopped to introduce themselves properly this time. A little sheepish, and I let them, because there is no use holding a grudge against people for not being able to see in the dark. Warren Tate waited until the room was almost empty. Then he came to the head of the table, and he stood in front of me, and he came to attention, a real one. Nothing performed in it. "Colonel Holt," he said, "there's no excuse for what I did. I made an assumption and I acted on it, and it was beneath the uniform. I'm prepared to accept whatever you decide." I looked at him for a moment. He was braced for the worst. A man who has run a room for 2 years and lost it in 10 minutes is braced for the worst, and part of him, I think, wanted it, because the worst would have been simpler than the thing I was about to hand him. "Sit down, Colonel," I said. He sat. "Let me tell you what I decided and why, because the why is the whole point." I could have ended Warren Tate. Not on the spot. But in the weeks that followed, quietly, the way these things are done. With a comment here and a conversation there. A chief of staff who assaults the incoming director's dignity in front of the council and a 4-star general does not have a strong position, and everyone in that building knew it. If I had wanted him gone, he would have been gone, and no one would have blamed me. General Kraft had all but offered it with his eyes. I did not want him gone. I want to be careful here, because this is where people misunderstand. I did not spare Warren Tate because I am a nice person, or because I did not care what he did. I cared. It was a small, ugly thing he did, and it came from a place in him that decides other people's worth by looking at them, and that place is dangerous in any officer, and especially in a chief of staff. I was not going to pretend it did not happen, but I had just watched myself do a smaller version of the same thing to Major Ashby, and I had spent a career being on the receiving end of it, and I had learned the long, slow way that you do not cure a man of looking through people by looking through him. You cure him, if you can cure him at all, by making him look, really look, at the people he has trained himself not to see. There was also a colder, more practical reason, and I will give it to you because it is true, and because I do not want you to think I am softer than I am. A directorate that watches its new director destroy the first man who crosses her learns exactly one lesson, and it is not the lesson you want. It learns that the way to be safe under this commander is to never be on the wrong side of her. And people who are busy staying on the right side of you are people who stop telling you the truth. They manage you. They tell you what you want to hear. And in my trade, the trade of knowing things, a staff that manages the boss instead of informing her is a staff that will one day let her walk into something with a smile on her face because no one wanted to be the one to say the uncomfortable thing. I could not afford that. Not in this job. The whole point of the room I wanted to build was that the truth could travel to me from anywhere, from the most junior analyst against my own rank if it had to. You do not build that room by making an example of a colonel in the first 10 minutes. You build it by showing 400 people that even the man who wronged you gets judged by his work and given a way to be better. Mercy in a directorate like mine is not softness. It is operational security. It keeps the channel open. What I wanted was for him to become useful and honest and awake. So here is what I did. I kept Warren Tate as my chief of staff. I did not demote him and I did not exile him. I told him he would keep his job on one condition. For the next month, before any product left our directorate, he would personally walk the working level. The analysts, the young officers, the sergeants who actually pull the threads. He would learn their names and their work and one true thing about each of them that was not in a file. And at the end of the month, he would come back and tell me about them. And if I believed he had actually seen them, we would never speak of the whisper again. You have a gift for running a room, I told him. Your problem is that you have stopped seeing the people in it. That is a fixable problem, but only you can fix it, and only by looking. Start with the major who found the gap you missed. I meant it as a practical instruction, and I meant it as a mirror, and I think he heard both. A chief of staff who cannot see the working level is a chief of staff who briefs around the gap every time. Because the gap always lives with the people at the bottom, the ones close enough to the problem to feel it and too junior to be asked. Tate had been briefing around gaps for 2 years. Not out of malice, out of distance. He had climbed high enough that the people who knew things had become, to him, a kind of weather, present and unremarkable and beneath notice. That is the most common way good officers go wrong. Not cruelty, distance. They stop bending down to straighten the chair. I am not doing this to punish you, I told him. If I wanted to punish you, I would let you keep going exactly as you are. And one day you would brief around a gap that mattered, and people would pay for it, and you would never even know it was you. That is the punishment. What I am offering you is the other thing. A way to stop being the man who cannot see. Take the month, do the work, and if at the end of it you have actually looked, we start clean. He looked at me for a long moment. He had come in ready to be broken, and instead he was being handed something harder than a punishment. He was being asked to become larger instead of smaller. Why? He said, and then, catching himself, May I ask why, ma'am, after what I did? Because I need a chief of staff who sees people, I said, and because I just did to Major Ashby what you did to me, in my head, and I didn't catch it until he slid a piece of paper across the table. If I can be wrong like that and still be worth keeping, so can you. But you have to do the work. The work is looking. Take it or don't. If you don't, General Kraft's opinion of you is a phone call away, and I think you know which way that call goes. He took it. He did the work. I watched for it, the way you watch a source you are not sure you trust, and I was ready for him to phone it in. He did not. Something had happened to Warren Tate in that room. The losing of it had been real, and a thing that is broken can be put back together, better or worse, and he chose better. He walked the working level for a month. He sat with the analysts in their windowless rooms. He learned the names. And more than the names, he learned the thing that a chief of staff most needs to know and most easily forgets. That the quietest person in the room is very often the one who knows the most, and that the whole job of leadership is to build a room where that person will speak. Sergeant Major Fowler reported in on him halfway through, unasked, the way she reported in on everything. She had watched him in the analyst's spaces, she said, standing in his pressed uniform among people in rumpled ones, and she had watched them decide, over about a week, that he was not there to catch anyone out. The turn came, she said, when an analyst, a specialist younger than his own children, tried to explain a piece of tradecraft to him and braced to be brushed off, and instead the colonel took out his notebook and asked her to slow down and say it again. A man asking to be taught is a different animal from a man performing that he already knows, Fowler said, and the room had smelled the difference immediately, the way a room always does. He is learning them, ma'am. More than that, he is letting them teach him. I do not know what you said to that man, but you crack something open, and something useful is growing in the crack. I told her I had given him a roster and a month. She said, that is not what you gave him, and did not explain, and left, which is a thing senior enlisted soldiers do when they have decided you can find the rest yourself. He came back at the end of the month with a notebook full of people, and he sat across from me and told me about them. And somewhere around the 20th name, his voice changed, and I knew he had stopped performing the assignment and started living it. He told me about Ashby. He told me the young major had turned down a more comfortable staff job to stay on the working level because that was where the real intelligence work happened, and that Tate had not known that, and that a month earlier he would have looked at Ashby and seen an eager kid trying too hard. The exact words I had used in my own head. He did not know I had used them. I did not tell him. Some lessons you keep. I understand now, he said at the end, why the general came down himself. Tell me. Because you're the one who sees them, he said. The quiet ones, the ones the rest of us look through. He came down to make sure the room knew because he knew we wouldn't figure it out on our own. I certainly didn't. You're figuring it out now, I said. That's most of it. Major Ashby, I pulled forward deliberately and without making a project of it because a young officer who is singled out too loudly gets a target on his back. I did not promote him over anyone. I did not make him my golden boy. I simply started doing the thing I wish someone had done for me at 29. When his work was good, I said his name, in rooms, out loud, to the people who decide things. I made sure that the thread he pulled did not get worn by someone else as their own coat. It is a small thing. It is the smallest thing, and it is the thing I most needed and most rarely got. And I had it in my power to give, and so I gave it. He did not need much. The good ones never do. They just need the room to be built so that the truth can be spoken by whoever holds it, regardless of rank. I built that room. It was the first thing I did as director and the thing I am proudest of. We say what we see. Rank waits its turn. I put it on the wall, more or less, in the way you put a thing on the wall by saying it in every meeting until people stop noticing they believe it. It changed the directorate slowly, the way real things change, without a single dramatic moment. The analysts started speaking up sooner. The gaps got named earlier when they were still cheap to fix. The product got better, not because anyone got smarter, but because the distance between the person who knew the thing and the person who decided the thing got shorter. That is all leadership is, in the end. Shortening that distance, making sure the quiet person holding the thread does not have to be lucky enough to catch a general's eye to be heard. I ran that directorate for 3 years. We did good work, some of it I can describe, and most of it I cannot. But the measure I trust is not any of the products or the briefs. It is that when I walked into a room in my 3rd year, the quiet person in the corner would look up and meet my eye, because they had learned that in my rooms, the quiet person gets asked. That is the whole of it. That is what I was trying to build from the moment a piece of paper slid across a table and showed me I had been part of the problem I thought I was the cure for. A year later, Neil Ashby was running his own fusion cell, and it pulled a thread that mattered, and when the brief went up, his name went with it. I made sure of that. I stood at the back of that room, a colonel now, the director, and I watched a young officer get the credit for his own 19 hours, and I did not say a word, and for once my silence said exactly what I meant. Sergeant Major Fowler retired at the end of my 2nd year in command. At her retirement, she told a story, and it was this one, though she told it her way. She said she had served under a lot of officers who could win a room. She said she had watched me win one in 10 minutes without raising my voice. And then, in the next 10 minutes, hand the brief back to the man who had whispered in my ear, and call on the major everyone else had overlooked, and she said that was the moment she decided she would follow me anywhere. She said the officers who can win a fight are common. She said the ones who can win a fight and then decline to enjoy it are rare, and that those are the only ones worth following, because those are the only ones who will not eventually turn the same sharpness on their own people. I keep her words where I keep the metal from the plywood room, in a drawer, out of sight, worth more than anything on the wall. I did not put them on the wall, and I have thought about why. Part of it is the old habit, the one I am still unlearning, the reflex to keep the things that matter most out of sight. But part of it is truer than that. Some recognition is for the room, and some is only for you, and the difference is worth knowing. The medal in the sergeant major's words are mine. They do not need to be seen by anyone else to be real. That, I think, is the last piece of the lesson, the one it took me the longest to reach. You take your chair so the room can do its work, not so the room can admire you. The chair is a tool, not a trophy. You sit in it because the work needs someone in it who sees. And when the day is done, you go home and the things that actually held you up stay quiet in a drawer where you can find them when you need them. So that is the story. The true version, without the perfect cold line, and the man marched off in ruins. A colonel I had never met leaned in at a war council and whispered, "Listen and don't speak," against my ear, because he looked at a small, quiet woman in a service uniform and decided she was no one. He did not know whose chair he was sitting one seat down from. He did not know that in 72 hours he would report to the person he had just told to be quiet. He did not know a 4-star general was about to walk the length of the room, past the whole council, past him, and come to me. He could not believe his ears when it happened. I did not raise my voice that whole morning. I did not need to. The doors did that for me, and the general did, and the chair did, waiting at the head of the table the way it had been waiting the whole time. And the thing I carried out of that room was not the whisper. It was the piece of paper that slid across the table from a young major I had underestimated exactly the way I had just been underestimated. That is the part I think about, not the moment I was seen, the moment I realized I had failed to see. I want to talk to you now, whoever you are, because I think you may be why this story found you. If you have ever been the quietest person in the room and been treated as though quiet meant small, I want to tell you the thing my 21 years finally taught me, and it comes in 2 parts, because it took me 2 parts to learn it. The first part is this: let your work speak. It is good advice, and it is true, but do not let your work speak instead of you. There is a difference, and I missed it for most of my career. Letting your work speak means doing the thing well and trusting it to matter. Letting your work speak instead of you means disappearing behind it, making yourself easy to overlook and calling your own erasure humility. It is not humility. It is a habit, and it is a costly one, and the cost is that you teach every room you enter to look through you. Take the chair that is yours. Not a day early if you are like me and you cannot sit in a seat you have not earned. But when it is yours, take it quietly, and do not apologize for the space you occupy. I know how hard it is. I am not telling you it is easy. The pull to disappear is old, and it is strong, and it disguises itself as your best qualities. It tells you that you are being humble, considerate, professional, a team player. It tells you that the work will speak for you, that the people who matter will notice, that there is no need to take up space when you can simply be excellent and let excellence do the rest. And it is lying to you, gently, in your own voice, the way the most dangerous habits always do. Excellence does not speak for itself. Someone has to say your name. And if you have trained the room to look through you, the person who says your name will too often be someone else. Wearing your work like a coat, and you will stand at the back and call your silence grace. You are allowed to be seen. That is the thing I wish someone had told the young captain in the plywood room. Being seen is not immodesty. It is not arrogance. It is just the refusal to help other people forget you are there. You can be quiet and still be seen. You can be humble and still take your chair. The two are not in conflict, and the years I spent believing they were in conflict are the years I would most like to have back. The second part is harder, and it is the part I almost did not tell you, because it does not flatter me. When someone looks through you, it is very easy to become certain you would never do the same. You would never be the one in the whisper. And then a piece of paper slides across a table, and you realize you already were. The same contempt that is aimed at you, you are aiming at someone else in the quiet of your own head and calling it judgment. So look, really look, at the eager young officer you dismissed with a glance. At the person off to the side, quiet, easy to miss, who may be the one in the room who knows the most. The cure for being unseen is not to become sharp. It is to become someone who sees. Take your chair and leave room at the table for the ones you might be overlooking. They are there. I promise you, they are there. Somebody is sitting one seat down, quiet, holding the thing you need, waiting for a room that will let them speak. Be the room. The end.